I always knew I was the family disappointment. The black sheep. The one who couldn't quite measure up to my golden siblings. What I didn't know was that my father had engineered it all, that behind his cold demeanor and harsh criticism lay a plan I couldn't begin to comprehend. 2 months ago, I stood in the back of my father's funeral, watching my brothers and sister accept condolences with practiced grace. The perfect children of the perfect patriarch. Richard Mason Sr., self-made millionaire from rural Minnesota who built Mason Industries from the ground up. A legend in Midwestern manufacturing. "Your father left something for you," the family attorney whispered, handing me a sealed envelope after everyone else had received their inheritance documents. My siblings got millions each. I got a handwritten note and $237,000 of debt. But that debt? It was the first clue in a twisted game my father had been playing since I was born. A game that would tear our family apart, expose decades of lies, and ultimately reveal which of us truly deserved the Mason legacy. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, success, and what it means to truly inherit a father's legacy. Growing up in Minneapolis as a Mason meant something. Our sprawling Victorian in Kenwood was a landmark, our family name adorned buildings at the University of Minnesota, and our 4th of July barbecues were attended by state senators and CEOs. My father built his empire manufacturing specialized agricultural equipment, machines that revolutionized farming across the Midwest. Dad was old-school Minnesotan to his core. Stoic, unflinching, expressing love through achievement rather than affection. "Mason men don't make excuses," he'd say. "They make results." My brothers Richard Jr. and Michael embodied this perfectly. Richard headed to Harvard Business School, Michael to West Point. My sister Catherine graduated top of her class at Northwestern, then joined the family business. Then there was me, Jacob Mason, the one who couldn't sit still in class, who questioned everything, who preferred sketching designs to studying spreadsheets. Wasted potential, Dad called it. I remember my 12th birthday. Dad had organized a baseball game with the neighborhood kids, a Mason tradition. When it was my turn at bat, he stood behind me, analyzing my stance. "Lower your elbow. Focus, Jake. Don't embarrass yourself." 3 strikes later, I heard him sigh as I walked back to the bench. "Maybe sports isn't your thing either," he said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The other dads exchanged glances. My brothers looked away, embarrassed. High school was worse. At the regional science fair, where Mason kids always dominated, my sustainable energy project malfunctioned during judging. Dad had come specifically to see it. "Engineering clearly isn't in your blood," he announced, walking away while I was still trying to fix the wiring. For my siblings' graduations, Dad commissioned custom watches from Switzerland. For mine, a practical gift card to Men's Warehouse so I could, at least look the part of a successful man. The ultimate humiliation came when I was 26. After years trying to fit into the family business, I'd finally developed something I was proud of, an innovative irrigation system that could save farmers thousands. I spent months perfecting it, certain this would finally earn Dad's approval. At the annual company summit, I presented my design to the entire executive team. 5 minutes in, Dad stood up. "This is unviable. The production costs alone would bankrupt a division." He turned to the room. "This is what happens when we prioritize creativity over practical business sense." I quit the next day. Started my own small design studio in South Minneapolis. Barely saw my family except at obligatory holidays and the occasional wedding or funeral. What I didn't know then was that Dad had secretly patented my irrigation system under his name 6 months after I left. It became one of Mason Industries' most profitable product lines. The grand gesture I'd spent my adult life resenting him for dismissing had been stolen, not discarded. And the secret? It was hidden in plain sight. Dad had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's when I was still in high school. His increasingly harsh criticism, his rigid adherence to tradition, his inability to acknowledge new ideas, all symptoms he was desperately hiding while grooming my siblings to take over. A secret the entire family kept from me because Dad insisted I couldn't handle the responsibility. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious how far this crazy family story has traveled. Last September, Dad's 70th birthday celebration brought the entire extended Mason family to our lake house in northern Minnesota. 3 days of forced family bonding at the sprawling cedar property on Lake Vermilion that had been in our family for generations. I almost didn't go. But Catherine called, insisting, "Dad's not getting any younger, Jake. Just show up, smile for the photos, and you can hide in the boathouse the rest of the weekend." I arrived late Friday as everyone was gathering for dinner. The cousins, the uncles, the business partners, all mingling on the massive deck overlooking the lake. Dad held court near the fire pit, looking frielier than I remembered but still commanding the space around him. "The prodigal returns," he announced when he spotted me, loud enough to turn heads. "Jake, your brother was just explaining the new expansion into the Dakota markets. 30 million in projected revenue. What's the latest from your little drawing business?" Richard Jr. smirked. "Jake's making art now, Dad. Very creative." "Industrial design," I corrected, forcing a smile. "And we just landed the children's hospital renovation. But I'm sure it's nothing compared to selling tractors." Dad's eyes narrowed. "Hospitals. Noble. Someone has to design the waiting rooms where the rest of us do the real work." That night set the tone. Saturday morning, the annual Mason family fishing competition paired us off by drawing names. Somehow, I ended up in a boat with Uncle Philip, Dad's older brother and the one who'd sold his company shares decades ago to Chase Dreams in California. The family's other black sheep. "You're more like him than you know," Uncle Philip said as we drifted toward a quiet cove. "Like who?" That's the worst insult you could give me." Philip laughed. "Richard wasn't always like this. Before your mother died, before the business took off, he was the dreamer. I was the practical one. He changed after Sarah passed. My mother had died when I was 4. I barely remembered her." "What are you saying?" "Just that inheritance isn't just about money, Jake. Some things pass down whether we want them or not." Before I could press him, we heard shouting from shore. Michael was waving us in frantically. Something had happened. Back at the house, paramedics were loading Dad into an ambulance. "Collapsed in the kitchen," Catherine explained, her perfect composure cracking. "They think it might be a stroke." The next 24 hours were chaos. The birthday celebration transformed into a hospital vigil. Tests run, specialists consulted. Dad stabilized but remained unconscious. In his hospital room, I found myself alone with him past midnight. My siblings had gone to arrange rooms at a nearby hotel. The monitors beeped steadily in the darkness. I studied his face, relaxed in unconsciousness in a way I'd never seen before. The stern lines around his mouth softened. He looked vulnerable. His phone on the bedside table lit up with a text. Without thinking, I glanced at it. A message from someone named Margaret. "Did you tell them yet?" "It's time, Richard. They deserve to know." "Tell us what?" "And who was Margaret?" As I set the phone down, Dad's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, there was confusion, then recognition. "Jake," he whispered. Not Jacob, like he always formally addressed me. "I'm here, Dad." He gripped my hand with surprising strength. "The safe. Home office. Code is your birthday." "What?" "Before they take everything." His eyes drifted closed again as a nurse entered to check his vitals. By morning, Dad had stabilized enough that the doctor mentioned possible discharge in a few days. My siblings swept in with their efficient care plans and second opinion specialists. "We've got this handled," Richard Jr. told me. "You should head back to Minneapolis. We'll call if anything changes." Something in his tone, the dismissal, the assumption that I had nothing to contribute, sparked an unfamiliar defiance in me. Dad's cryptic message replayed in my mind. "Actually," I said, "I think I'll stay a bit longer. Check on some things at the lake house while everyone's here." Richard exchanged glances with Michael. "What things?" "Just maintenance stuff. Dad mentioned the boathouse needed work." 3 hours later, I was alone in Dad's home office, staring at the wall safe hidden behind a painting of the original Mason factory. My birthday. 6 digits that Dad had rarely remembered, now serving as a code to what? The safe swung open to reveal a manila envelope, a small leather journal, and a USB drive. The envelope contained documents showing transferal of $237,000 in personal debt from Richard Mason Sr. to Jacob Mason, effective upon his death. Loans, credit lines, even gambling debts I never knew he had. The journal contained entries spanning 20 years, detailing a double life none of us knew about. And the USB drive? Financial records showing that the Mason fortune, all $30 million of it, was built on fraudulent accounting, tax evasion, and intellectual property theft, including my irrigation system. I sat at his desk, stunned, as headlights swept across the driveway. My siblings had arrived hours earlier than expected. From the window, I watched all three of them exit Richard's Range Rover, faces set with determination. They knew I was here, and something told me they knew exactly what was in the safe. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep sharing stories like this one. I barely had time to pocket the USB drive and tuck the journal into my jacket before the front door slammed open. Heavy footsteps crossed the foyer. I closed the safe, reset the painting, and was sitting casually at Dad's desk when all three siblings burst into the office. "Found what you were looking for?" Richard Jr. asked, his lawyer voice in full effect. "Just going through some old photos," I lied, gesturing to a stack of albums I'd pulled from the bookshelf as cover. "Reminiscing." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "The safe, did you open it?" "What safe?" Michael crossed the room in 3 strides, swinging the painting aside to reveal the still warm metal door. "This safe. The one Dad explicitly told us was off limits to everyone." "Everyone except me, apparently," I said, standing up. "He gave me the code last night." The three exchanged glances. A silent communication developed over years of excluding me from their inner circle. "Whatever he showed you," Richard said carefully, "it's not the full picture. Dad's medication makes him confused. Confused enough to transfer his personal debt to me, while leaving the rest of you millions." Catherine stepped forward, always the mediator. "Jake, Dad protected you by keeping you at arm's length from the business. There are complications in our finances that what, Kath? That justify him stealing my designs? That explain why the company books show 2 sets of numbers? Or maybe they explain who Margaret is." The name landed like a bomb. Michael actually flinched. "Who told you about her?" Richard demanded. "Dad did. And his journal filled in the rest." A bluff? I hadn't had time to read it. But their reactions told me everything. "You need to give us those documents," Michael said, voice low and dangerous. "Now." I backed toward the door. "I don't think I will. In fact, I'm thinking the IRS might find them interesting. Or maybe the shareholders." "You'd destroy this family over some petty revenge?" Richard's face flushed red. "After everything Dad built for us? Built? Or stole?" I was surprising myself with this newfound courage. "The birthday dinner tomorrow. When everyone's gathered. That's when we'll sort this out." "There won't be a dinner," Catherine said. "Dad's in the hospital." "Then we'll have it without him. All the aunts, uncles, cousins, board members, everyone who thinks they know the Mason legacy. 7 o'clock. I'll be making an announcement." I left them standing there, stunned into silence. The next 24 hours were psychological warfare. Texts from siblings alternating between threats and pleas. Calls from family lawyers offering settlements. Even Uncle Philip warned me to think carefully about turning over apple carts. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me. Years of dismissal of being the family punchline had crystallized into resolve. I spent the night reading Dad's journal by flashlight in my old childhood bedroom, the truth worse than I'd imagined. Dad had built his initial fortune by stealing designs from his former business partner, my mother's brother, then driving him to bankruptcy. The irrigation system was just the latest in a long pattern. Mom hadn't died in an accident as we'd been told. She'd left him after discovering his infidelity with Margaret, his secretary and longtime mistress. She died 2 years later, alone in Arizona, while we were told she was buried in Minneapolis. The debts he'd transferred to me? Payoffs to keep people quiet. By 7 the next evening, the lake house dining room held 23 members of the extended Mason family and business inner circle. Richard had arranged for Dad to conference in from his hospital bed, a power move to remind everyone who still controlled the room. Dad's face filled the large screen mounted on the wall as appetizers were served. He looked diminished against the white hospital pillows, but his eyes narrowed when he saw me take the seat at the head of the table. His seat. "I believe Jacob has an announcement," Richard said tightly when dinner was cleared. "Something so important it couldn't wait for your recovery, Dad." All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. The journal and USB drive sat on the table before me. "I've always been the family disappointment," I began, voice steadier than I expected. "The one who couldn't quite measure up to the Mason standard. Today I learned why." I detailed everything. The fraud, the stolen designs, the double books, the mistress. With each revelation, the room grew more still. Aunt Helen gasped. Cousin William, a company VP, stared at his hands. Uncle Philip nodded almost imperceptibly. "The Mason fortune isn't built on hard work and innovation," I concluded. "It's built on theft, fraud, and lies. And I refuse to be part of it any longer." On the screen, Dad's face had gone ashen. "Jacob, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You transferred your debts to me because you knew I'd be the only one to actually pay them. The only one with actual integrity." Richard half rose from his seat. "That's enough." "No, it's not nearly enough," I shot back. "The IRS will get copies of everything tomorrow. The patent office too. You can all fight over what's left." I walked out of that silent room, out of the house, and drove straight through the night back to Minneapolis. Behind me, I left the family that had never truly accepted me. Ahead lay uncertainty, and for the first time, a strange sense of freedom. Dad's text came at dawn. "You were never the disappointment. You were the only one I could trust with the truth." The fallout was nuclear. Within 48 hours, Mason Industries' stock plummeted. The board called an emergency meeting. The business pages of the Star Tribune ran headlines questioning the future of one of Minnesota's most storied companies. I holed up in my apartment, ignoring the barrage of calls and texts. Only one message got through to me, a voicemail from Margaret herself. "Your father spoke of you often, Jacob. More than you know. Please call me. There are things you don't understand yet." Curiosity won out. We met at Mickey's Diner in St. Paul, neutral territory. Margaret Callahan wasn't what I expected. In her mid-60s, elegant but unassuming, with kind eyes that had seen too much. "Your father wasn't a perfect man," she said after we ordered coffee. "But he wasn't the monster you think. He stole from his family. Lied to us our entire lives." She nodded. "Yes. And he protected you in the only way he knew how." The truth, as Margaret revealed it, was more complex than I could have imagined. Dad's Alzheimer's diagnosis had come 15 years earlier than we thought, when I was just entering high school. The disease had progressed slowly, allowing him to hide it while making increasingly erratic business decisions. Richard Jr. and Michael had discovered his condition when I was in college. Rather than expose him, they'd begun covering for his mistakes, eventually crossing ethical and legal lines to maintain the family empire. Catherine joined them later. The three had become willing accomplices, justifying each compromise as necessary to protect the Mason legacy. "Your father kept you at a distance deliberately," Margaret explained. "He saw something in you that reminded him of who he was before the money, before the power changed him. He couldn't bear to watch you become. So all the criticism, the public humiliation. His broken way of pushing you toward a different path. Away from the corruption he'd created." She slid a key across the table. "This opens a storage unit in Edina. Everything you need is there." The storage unit contained boxes of original design notebooks, including my irrigation system, with notarized documentation proving I was the true inventor. There were also financial records showing a separate account in my name, built from the actual profits of my stolen design. Over $2 million. And a letter, written in Dad's increasingly shaky handwriting. Jake, if you're reading this, you've found the courage I never had. The debt I left you is real, not financial but moral. It's the debt I owe for building a legacy on lies. The money in this account is yours by right. Use it better than I used mine. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become. I am too, though I never found the words to tell you. Dad, 2 days later, Richard came to my apartment. Alone, unannounced, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The IRS is auditing everything, he said, standing awkwardly in my living room. Securities and Exchange Commission too. Good. The company will survive, but it'll be different. Smaller. The board is forcing all 3 of us out. He paused. Dad's being moved to a specialized care facility tomorrow. The doctors say the Alzheimer's has accelerated. The words hit harder than I expected. Despite everything, he was still my father. Why did you do it, Rich? Cover for him all these years. My brother, always so confident, so perfectly poised, seemed to deflate. It started small. Fixing a mistake here, covering a bad decision there. By the time we realized how deep it went. He shook his head. It was our inheritance to protect. At any cost? We told ourselves we were just buying time. That we'd fix it once Dad was gone. A bitter laugh. Self-deception runs in the family, I guess. What happened over the next 3 months transformed all our lives. Dad's condition deteriorated rapidly. I visited him weekly at Prairie Pines Memory Care. Some days he knew me, calling me Jake, instead of the formal Jacob. Other days I was a stranger. During one lucid moment, he gripped my hand. The debt, he whispered. Did you understand? I think so, Dad. It wasn't about money. A shadow of his old smile. Smartest one of all of you. The legal consequences rolled through like a slow-motion tsunami. Richard and Michael both faced securities fraud charges, eventually pleading to lesser offenses with community service and fines. Catherine cooperated with authorities and emerged relatively unscathed, though her reputation in business circles was tarnished. Mason Industries survived under new leadership, downsized but ethically restructured. I used my rightful design profits to launch a proper engineering firm specializing in sustainable agriculture technology. Within 6 months, we'd secured contracts that the old Mason Industries could never have imagined. Partnerships built on innovation rather than intimidation. The unexpected twist came when Uncle Philip revealed his own secret. He'd kept detailed records of Dad's early business dealings, including the original theft from my mother's brother. Not out of malice, but as insurance against the day when truth would be needed. Your mother made me promise to watch over you, he told me over dinner at his cabin near Duluth. To make sure you didn't become consumed by the family business the way your father was. You could have told me years ago. Would you have believed me? Or would it have just driven you further away from us all? He had a point. I needed to discover the truth myself to truly understand it. Margaret became an unexpected ally and friend. She'd been more than Dad's mistress. She'd been his moral compass for decades, trying to steer him back toward integrity even as the disease slowly robbed him of judgment. The revelation that she'd been the one encouraging him to tell us the truth in those final months changed my perception of their relationship. 6 months after the confrontation, Dad passed away peacefully in his sleep. His funeral was smaller than anyone would have predicted for Richard Mason Sr. Just family, a few loyal employees, no business dignitaries or political connections. Standing by his grave in Lakewood Cemetery, beneath November maple trees stripped bare by Minnesota winds, I realized the true inheritance he'd left me wasn't money or status or business connections. It was the opportunity to build something authentic, something unburdened by the weight of lies. The debts were real, though not just the financial ones he'd formally transferred. I spent the next year paying them all, meeting with people he'd wronged over the decades, making amends where possible, acknowledging the truth where repayment wasn't possible. My siblings and I established an uneasy truce. Christmas at Catherine's suburban home was awkward but not hostile. Richard's twins still called me Uncle Jake and demanded piggyback rides. Michael, humbled by his fall from grace, showed genuine interest in my sustainable design work. You know, he said as we watched the kids open presents, Dad always kept every article about your design projects. Even the small ones in local papers. He never said anything to me about them. Michael shrugged. He wasn't good at saying the important things. None of us were. We were learning. Slowly, imperfectly, we were becoming a real family. One built on hard truths rather than comfortable lies. 2 years after that fateful confrontation at the lake house, I stood in the newly opened Mason Center for Sustainable Innovation at the University of Minnesota. Not named after my father, but funded by the foundation I'd established with my legitimate design earnings and focused on developing agricultural technologies for small family farms across the Midwest. The center's first major project? An improved version of my irrigation system, now accessible to farmers who could never have afforded Mason Industries' inflated prices. We'd already seen implementation across southern Minnesota and northern Iowa, with promising results even in drought conditions. Richard had found a second career teaching business ethics, of all things, at St. Thomas University. His legal background and first-hand experience with corporate fraud made him surprisingly effective at showing students where moral compromises lead. Catherine ran a successful consulting firm helping family businesses navigate succession planning and governance. Michael had moved to Montana, working with veterans, organizations, and finding peace in the distance from his former life. As for me, I found that standing in your truth, however painful, creates foundation for authentic success. The debt Dad left me, the moral obligation to right his wrongs, had become not a burden but a guide. Each corrected injustice, each restored relationship, each honest business deal became a stone in a new kind of Mason legacy. I still visit Dad's grave sometimes, especially in autumn when the cemetery's maple trees turn the color of fire. I tell him about the center's work, about the family's slow healing, about the letters we still receive from people grateful that the truth finally came to light. I imagine him nodding in that understated Midwestern way, perhaps with the hint of pride he could never quite express in life. In his own broken way, he'd given me exactly what I needed, not a fortune built on deception, but the chance to discover what I was truly made of. The inheritance worth having was never about the money. It was about finding the courage to break destructive patterns, to choose integrity even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted, to build something that can last because it's founded on truth. So what's your legacy going to be? What truths are you avoiding in your own family or work? What would happen if you had the courage to face them? Sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most meaningful transformations. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. We're building a community of people committed to authentic living and honest legacy building. This is Jake Mason, signing off, grateful for the debt that taught me the true value of inheritance.